All right, what's going on, macro perspective peeps? We got another good episode here. Uh, good articles coming out lately. Just they're hitting the virality button. So we just kind of wanted to elaborate, put our perspective on the nuance and stuff. Today we're gonna talk about a article that came out a few days ago from the Daily Mail. 16.5 million Americans at risk if they do high intensive cardio. Now, with that being said, that definitely catches the eye when you are going through Instagram, through the TikToks and Facebook, and you don't read it. Because I got into that and I was like, what the F is this? Without even reading it, I was already posting it like, did y'all see this? But obviously, when you read into the article, there's a nuance and you got to go into it. But Marcos, let me know, what'd you think of that article? What were some of your thoughts, my man?
So, I mean, it estimated that 5% of America has a potential issue, and that's where that figure comes up with 16.5. So, 16.5 million, that is. And I think, like looking into the research and how it was done, there's three different models that says that there's blockages, being presented here. And somewhere one of them was like what 30%, and then people with severe being like 50%, right? And
Mm-hmm.
um, so like yeah, the different heart rates are responding to different stimuluses with physical activity, as we likely all know at this point. But they're they're saying that the average heart rate was like 67 beats per minute. Moderate exercise is what they're calling 100 beats per minute, and then strenuous exercise like 140. And so like that latter heart rate being done through cycling, Zumba, other activities. Um, and so one, so 5% of people, okay, well, let's back it up, right? I think, what is the current percentage in terms of actual people that are overweight or obese, Seamus?
It's getting above 50.
Okay, so we have over 50%. And how many people that are like in that diagnosis category are typically on like medications, do you think? Or do you think we should look that up?
We might have to look that up, but that's becoming like, being statins and different things for the heart and for the lipid profile there has been kind of becoming more common and common, right? I don't know the exact number on that, but let's see if we can pull it up here in a moment.
Okay. So I think the thing that was interesting though is like even in this quote where it says intense exercise shows adverse effects in patients with moderate or higher stenosis levels. I mean, that feels like kind of a redundant statement, right? Like obviously if you're stressing out the heart and there's already stress on it, like your risk will likely be much higher, right?
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, like I mean, I feel like every piece of equipment that's created says consult with your physician before starting a strenuous exercise program for a reason, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like the you know the increase of stress at what they're saying the stenosis zone can then lead
Mhm.
to rupture, right? So
Right.
I mean, like if this is what the article is talking about, like, well, how would people even know if they have stenosis going on? Like, what's the scan again that like really helps uh, validate that diagnosis?
Yeah. That's a good question. I know that we look at the carotid quite often, right? And we do a carotid intima media thickness scan. So we're kind of looking at that muscle wall, that lining, that thickness, and then just making sure any of those arteries, aren't there for atherosclerosis. And also at the same time, any plaque buildup that could be there could be seen. We're looking at blockages or artifacts, right? With that being said, what delegates stenosis? How often can people get that test? Is it accessible? How quick is it? And do they have to do a procedure or anything like that that makes them, hey, I have to do a whole different way so that I can get back to the cardio? Are these people older, to where intensive cardio that we recommend for younger people, can they easily get into that? I don't know. I think that's a question, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I feel like I feel like this article said a lot without saying anything, right? Like I don't see it like having a study like attached to it. I know there's like a couple iterations of it, but
Yeah.
is this, like what is it? Oh, here's the study. It actually is a study on the NIH website, and so over 20 years of age um, have the coronary artery disease. So that was according to the American Health
Mm.
Association or Heart Association, AHA, right? And then,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, okay, so like that, there we go. So like there is some research that was pulled. It was last updated end of February. So obviously that's probably why it's gaining some traction now because people are like looking for something a little bit clickbaity. But I mean, coronary artery disease, I mean,
Hmm.
obviously that's what they're saying is the most common form of heart disease, which is news to me. I didn't realize that's why we would do that test. I thought like, uh, and I know that we're like really working in the Synergenics organization to use newer technologies that give a better like AI run through model of like people's actual like cardiovascular health through like some imaging, and it's like
Yeah.
pretty like advanced and brand new, and yeah, so like obviously heart disease is like really one of the big four, right? When it comes to like potential issues in like health conditions. And so, I mean, what if we ask the question is like, okay, what are people generally doing before the age of 20? Is that what it was? Yeah,
Hmm.
before the age of 20, that's contributing to these things. Is it just because of genetic abnormalities, or is this generally because of um, maybe some inactivity that's happening from people that were born like 1998 and they've moved into this new generation, right?
Yeah. I'd say it's a bit of all of it, right? I'd say it's a bit of inactivity just because with the new gen, it's a little bit of that. Um, Not everyone is there because we see young and fit kids still. Eh, There might be some genetic anomalies for sure. You definitely see that, and it could be a combination of these things. So I don't think we can pinpoint it to one. If you can definitely control some of these outcomes, I mean, by 20, and you're having coronary heart disease at 20 and above, that's super concerning. And if you didn't flag for it before, then that's also concerning as well, because then, like, how are your parents or your healthcare team, you know, dealing with you, right? Are they doing the right scans? Are they doing the right things? Because if they aren't, that means in the system of healthcare, they're not particularly scanning for it, and they're just waiting until you're 20 when they should have scanned for it earlier so that you as an individual that might have this can have some preventative measures before you're 20. They should have seen it by the time you're 11 or something like that, right? um, and hopefully, like you just said, with new technologies, it's a little bit more accessible, a little bit more doable, so that you don't necessarily have to wait until a certain time, maybe as an adult, to figure these things out about yourself. um, and you don't have to necessarily wait on the basic healthcare model here in America to know about this. I mean, as a younger person than 20 years old, maybe health is not necessarily particularly important to you just because you have youth on your side. But for families that are genetically disposed or might know of this, or if it's just a quick scan that's affordable, I think it should be this lands on the parents kind of, lap, right?
I agree. I also had a hypothesis that most of these like genetic issues or things that they're saying is like an issue with like your familial history is actually more of an environmental issue than it
Mm,
actually is genetic, because if you think about the proximity that somebody generally lives from like a loved one, growing up, it's obviously the influence is like they're in the same environment probably for at least 20
yeah, yeah,
years,
yeah,
right? Or 18 years before they're like off to college, but they're still back in that
yeah, yeah,
situation. And again, like pollutants and things, like let's look at what happened in Ohio when that water all got tainted a couple of months ago, right? Like that's a
that
huge
was a
environmental
wild
disaster,
storyline. Yeah.
right? And then like you're now drinking the water that they're trying to purify, but maybe there's some things like ppms, right, on that like particular solvent that's causing an issue with people. So I've always had the sneaking suspicion that it's actually environmental, and I bet you if you looked at the actual like radius and like could narrow it down in terms of like radius and proximity to your family, whether or not like a disease is truly like environmental or again familial or genetic.
I think you make a great point there because proximity wise, if things are, if certain people with certain environments, certain culture are doing certain things, right, you then have to realize, okay, what is going on here that is making these people to have these alleles and genes transcribed? Oh, just that environment. It's just that environment. It's those people in that environment. And they've had to evolve a certain way that having this stenosis is just something that's mutated or something that's particularly came out. So that actually makes sense. There's a I think there's a book about this called like a troublesome inheritance that like a lot of genetic issues aren't necessarily based off of like you can marry someone, go somewhere else, whatever, but like it really does sometimes come down to the environment because that environment just produces certain types of you know genes that express differently, right?
Epigenetics, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean this is kind of profound. It's kind of profound. I mean, the article is clickbaity in a sense, but I think it needs more grounds in science, epigenetics, whatever we need to look at to say, hey, okay, where does this really transpire? How come this is transpiring? And how do we change the environment? How do we change all this? Or again, answering those questions of how do we flag for this? Because again, the biggest concern for me is 20 years old to find out about this. You should be finding out about this quicker than that. So
Yeah. So that age range, that before 20. So there was another study that I was able to quickly pull up here that talks about. Obviously, you mentioned this on I think a previous episode where there was like a 3% increase in the number of adolescents or kids from 2 to 19 that were classified as overweight or obese in terms of
yeah,
BMI. And that all happened during the pandemic years where even more idle time than what schools have now, because we're going to assume most of these kids are generally in some sort of school setting. It's not like they're going to
yeah,
a trade school that often anymore. Um,
hmm
so again, like one in five kids are now classified with that. And again, like maybe some of those 14, 15-year olds are getting into the gym and they're gaining muscle, right? So maybe they actually are quote overweight because they're like putting on good weight as well. So like that could be a potential error in the statistics, but nonetheless, so like one in five, almost one in four at this point of that cohort, which has almost like 500,000 kids that are in that cohort or in that study, is it's pretty it's pretty crazy in terms of like the weight gain that can happen due to I'm just going to call it stagnation, right? Um, what
yeah,
what happened during COVID? We're all shut down for a year, and there's no getting outside, there's no playing sports, and maybe the kids that really relied on that to like really keep them like in tune have tuned out.
yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely, COVID definitely brought on some new problems. I mean, with kids, it's even more so. But the biggest thing has to be that movement, right? They're not national movement, um, the stress, right? So definitely something to. It's profound that like these things are quite happening now. It's interesting how post COVID the lifestyle of these kids is very much challenged, whether it's this or also like how they socialize or how they do things. Um, already, I mean, if you just think about it, already on a healthcare system, right? If you just throw something like COVID at it, um, you just kind of see how it falters, right? You just see how it falters, and it's just now we're seeing some of these effects happen now. So yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, like key takeaway wise though, like because it was a pretty short read, like I mean, obviously got you thinking. You're like, whoa, this is like kind of crazy, but I mean, that's just like again, they took a number based on studies. They figured it was 5% as the sample size, so they extrapolated it, and then therefore came up with a number. But you think it's really 16.5 million people that are like, we'll say what? And again, like, what does that risk mean in this context? Like,
yeah. I don't know. And what it means to me though is like I think it's a little against fear mongering with social media or the media, and now like whoever. feels like they're one of those 16.5 million, are we fearing them from not trying to work out hard? Are we fearing them from not trying to do some training, not trying to push themselves, that we know that exercise induced like adaptations are going to be great? Is there a way that they can work on this so that, like, hey, whether it be through like the statins or whatever, like that, like they can go back to the exercise? I mean, obviously we know that with bringing them down in their body weight, bringing them down, watching their stress, watching their sleep, their lifestyle, the foods that they intake, bringing their blood pressure down, and then in a few months trying it again, like, okay, like, where was that, right? Where was that kind of mediated plan? Why is it just like, hey, here's a fear article, go ahead, don't work out, right? So I think I think it's not what you can't. Let's talk about what you can do, right?
I agree. And it makes me wonder about like, so let's just say like someone doesn't go to college or someone does, and that takes you between like 18 and 22, and or maybe you're in like some early jobs in your early 20s, and I feel like the thing that would make the most sense is I know some government institutions actually like pay their employees to make sure they get a workout in during the workday, so that they're like dedicating that time. Like, is that something you think could be a viable option, like long term, to like facilitate like again like employers pay the cost of most people's medical premiums, right? Like that's like generally like a benefit that an employer will offer. It costs a great amount of money for an employer to do so. Um, but like, I mean, if they can
Yeah.
show statistically like that they don't have to go to the doctor as often, or maybe it is just like for like their annual blood work and like workup, like because they have these other like systems in play, would that make would that be like a solution? Because we're not really doing like trade anymore. Why are we in an 8 hour workday? You know what I mean? Like, how do we, is it like four, take an hour or two to work out and then come like finish off the day with like whatever, like inbox cleaning? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there has to be like a repositioning of how like a day is structured for people potentially, so that they can still make time for their health and almost like their employer can force it on them.
Yeah, I agree. I think when the employer kind of quote unquote forces it or kind of like incentivizes it, I think you see a lot more things happen. A lot of those things too do help with the insurance premiums, right? If employers do that, those insurance premiums can go down, right? And then as an incentive, I've seen that in the health and wellness community, with some professionals that I know where they train these people, or they have like staff on the floor that they just kind of have this gym there, and they talk about nutrition and like the food as there, and then they have like a health and wellness coach on staff. um they definitely want to see productivity go up, but you're not necessarily attacking productivity by like, hey, let's just get our sales numbers up or our EBITDA up. It's more like, let's make sure the people we have are being taken care of. I think that's going to be super profound and super powerful if more companies really care about their culture and people, starting from the health foundation. Because if you can do that, I think you can see not just productivity go up, but obviously then really affect the healthcare landscape. I think this is a great opportunity for companies to realize like they probably have more control over this joystick of like healthcare than anyone else, probably. Big companies, right? Companies that might be overworking their people. I mean, that leads to stress, less movement. If they can flip the script and say, hey, let's make sure our employees aren't necessarily chronically stressed, they're moving well, they're getting everything that they absolutely need, and we can support that, how much more could you guys like give? And like, if these are big companies, how that really affects America's healthcare system. It wouldn't be so impacted. You wouldn't see the numbers we'd had if people took that responsibility. Now, there's the argument like, well, that should be down to the individual, but we've seen these incentives before. We've seen these before, and I think it'd be great to have these practices consistent, right?
I think so. I think that an employee will always, again, not to mention the cost of like starting a new employee out, like if there's turnover, if that person is so dead set that their life is so in order that like they have nowhere else that they want to go, right? Like then they're there for forever and they can continue to live a healthier lifestyle. And I think this is like actually a great like business venture opportunity, where a consultant comes in, explains the details, much like an actuary, shows them how much they can improve, again, workspace productivity, total costs of like the, to the company that they're paying out, how to like negotiate better premiums based on their sample size or their population, which is their employees, right? Because I'm sure there's statistics on like so and so had a heart attack in HR, or so and so has these medical conditions, and again, like maybe if people disclose that and they're more forthcoming with it, it allows for, again, like a big pivot in a positive way. But too, I understand people might respect like wanting privacy, and they, like there's maybe a stigma if you have a certain condition. Um, but I mean, I do feel like, I mean, how many hours a day would you say that you have to, or a week, do you have to dedicate to work outside of the 8 hours that you're actually at work
A
per day?
lot more, probably a lot more, probably like another hour or so, two maybe.
Probably, yeah, another one. So basically, you spend 10 hours, so you're at like 50, right? Which basically takes away 5 complete days because it's like your wake up time and everything else is moved around in order to facilitate that. Because again, most people aren't living like hop, skip, and jump away from like where they work typically,
Oh yeah, then yeah, like
right?
2 hours basically per day, right? And all, yeah, so yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely there, and I think people understand that, like, if we're gonna be stuck in, I don't want to say stuck, but if we're gonna be in a place that we're gonna do work and we're doing this travel, we're doing this, especially like in a concentrated metropolitan area like Los Angeles, like there's got to be an incentive to make your employees as robust as possible, not just the work they do. I mean, come on, how much more productive do you get after a workout, right? Like, people give themselves 4 hours to do work, but then they're like so productive that it's done in like an hour and a half. Then you realize, like, oh, look at how much, you know.
Yeah.
So there's definitely an
Mm-hmm.
argument for
Like logical learning, math in particular, after a high intensity workout is actually where people with like ADD or some sort of deficit of like attention, actually can show the most growth because they're stimulated and tired enough where they can actually let their mind kind of absorb information. And so kids that generally score the best on like math tests are when they have their physical education class beforehand, right?
it.
So
Hmm.
if you think about like even in your workday when you feel most productive, it's probably like that like Goldilocks zone after your workout, probably like the first 2-3 hours after it, right? So I mean, again, like I'd love to be able to create something like that that like actually, again, helps for one retain employees, helps them have that thing, helps it like be part of like what they do. You know what I mean? And again, find what works best for them because I mean, at the end of the day, like a healthier employee is not sick. They're not calling out. They're willing to go the extra mile. They want to find new things to do. Versus like I got to clock out so I can try to make this and then pick up my kids and do all those other things. So, um,
Yeah,
you know, yeah. So I mean, obviously this conversation
I
can keep
think.
going, but like the
Well, yeah, we could talk about health and wellness. We'll put it down. Health and wellness programs in the workspace. We'll bookmark it here. Um, we'll end it here. But guys, I think you know the biggest thing here is, don't get fear mongered by clickbait. Read into it. You might have to understand a little bit more. You might do a little bit more reading because there's like 4 studies with it. But realize, like, a lot of this stuff is fear mongering, and a lot of it has a little bit of truth, but not the whole truth. And it actually has more questions than answers. So you got to do that for yourself. And realizing, I think one of the things we realize here is, like, you can't rely on one system, whether that be your healthcare. You've got to rely on yourself, rely on your community, rely on their work, maybe. So, yeah, with that being said, Marcos, anything else to close us off, man?
No, I think it just brought some like interesting thoughts and things to help improve that. But again, if we flip the script on this article and say 95% of Americans aren't at risk, then it doesn't get any clicks. But you put a number like 16.5 million, which is again 5% of the population, then it gets clicks. So
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, you really think about it. 95% of people are great, and then it's like, but yeah, 16.5 million is scarier. So, anyways, guys, like, comment, share. I think you should share
yeah,
this one, guys. I think this is a good one to kind of share with somebody, kind of get the conversation rolling, and see where your health is at. How does your work deal with your health? So, let's get it going. Thanks, team.
all right. Thanks again, guys. Like, comment, like Seamus said, and if you have any other questions that we should tackle or articles that you thought were interesting, we'd love to see them in the comments as well.